From the CyberHub bunker and studio, you're tuning in to the CyberHub Podcast. And now for your host and CISO, James Azar.
Good morning, security gang. Happy New Year and welcome to 2025. Wow. I hope if you're awake, that means that you probably slept at a decent hour, which is good. You know, I think, when I was in my 20s or late in my teens, staying up and as long as humanly possible to welcome the new year, completely intoxicated was a thing, but not anymore, right? We're really excited to bring this show for all y'all this morning. Good morning to John tuning in on YouTube and everyone else. So a few things. One, if you've missed the news this morning, not cyber related, but our hearts are with the city of New Orleans, who the mainstream media won't say it, but suffered a terror attack this morning that's already claimed the lives of 12 Americans and injured 30 others. It's now being reported that the perpetrator, the attacker or slash terrorist behind the attack, was neutralized by law enforcement after a pursuit. So obviously more information will come of that today. But our hearts are with the folks over in New Orleans and the New Orleans law enforcement group who are obviously dealing with a mass casualty terror attack in the city on New Year's Eve. So our hearts are out there. Additionally, not to be a bummer on New Year's Eve, but 100 hostages still being held in Gaza for a whole year. They didn't get to celebrate 2023. The welcoming of 2024 or the welcoming of 2025. We pray for their release as soon as humanly possible. We know that negotiations have stalled, and the idea that they might be released before President Trump is in office have now been reduced to pretty much almost not likely, from being very optimistic just a few days ago. So while we all got to celebrate the new year, we're all grateful for that. We do know that tragedies around us still happen, and we ought to acknowledge them as a whole. So without further ado, hopefully 2025 will not be the way it just started. My hope is that 2025 is a year of success, of health, of fruitfulness, of community, of coming together, of bridging gaps, and of doing what's best for our families. So I hope that's the case for all of y'all. Happy New Year. Welcome to 2025. Our first coffee cup cheers. I've got a great double espresso here. Coffee cup cheers 2025. Here we go. 2025 is also a quarter of a century. Like, it's a quarter of a century. And by the way, like, thinking about this over the last few weeks, right? 2025 marks a quarter of the century. We all remember Y2K 25 years ago. At least if you're in my age group, you remember Y2K 25 years ago. Turn off your computers. Everything's going to crash. Nothing's going to be able to handle it. And obviously we survived Y2K. And between 2000 and 2025, where we are today, the world has completely transformed, right? Smartphones weren't a thing in 2000. Hell, flip phones, Nokia was the biggest thing on the planet, right? Texting was still kind of a thing. A sidekick was just being introduced. The reason I say all that is because over a quarter of a century, leaders, technology, everything has evolved except one: Russia's Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin has been in rule for 25 years. And this Saturday, I dive deep into the 25-year rule of Vladimir Putin in Russia, from domestic policy to cybersecurity to AI to his constant leadership in Russia and across the world stage. There's arguably haven't been as influential of a leader in the first quarter century of this century than Vladimir Putin. So make sure you go subscribe at cyberhubpodcast.com. Now let's get into the news this morning, because I've wasted a lot of time there. So finally, after Brian Krebs has indicated that the attacker behind the Snowflake attack. So when we say the Snowflake attack, we reiterate that Snowflake was not breached. That's a common misconception here. Snowflake had over 100 some odd customers of theirs breached when their username and passwords were compromised and MFA wasn't enforced on those accounts. But Snowflake itself was not breached. And Brian Krebs, if you don't follow Krebs on security, absolutely must. He first reported this way back. We talked about this on the show earlier this month, in December, that Brian Krebs believes that the person behind the attack was a U.S. Army soldier detained, stationed somewhere overseas, apparently, just due to some of the stuff they were doing online. Well, federal authorities have now unsealed the indictment against 20-year-old Cameron John Wagenes, 20, on December 20th, near the U.S. Army military base of Fort Cavazos, formerly known as Fort Hood in Texas. The two-count indictment against Cameron John Wagenes, filed under seal on December 18th and released on Monday, says that charges him with knowingly and intentionally selling and transferring confidential phone record information without obtaining prior authorization from the customer to whom such confidential phone records information related to, as well as having a reason to know such information was obtained fraudulently. This is around the AT&T breach because of Snowflake. Federal prosecutors also declined to comment about an alleged connection between Wagenes and the theft of data from customers of Bozeman, Minnesota's based Snowflake that includes AT&T and Verizon. But based on these charges, it seems like the initial charges against them are for AT&T, Verizon. Chances are there will be more charges forthcoming, but I think this was the first move there. Obviously, we talked about this earlier in the show last month, but police arrested a suspect in Canada, Musaka. He has been there. Turkish police arrested Bins in May. That's on separate charges. Both our suspects are still awaiting extradition to the United States. But now we know that a U.S. Army private is accused of being that. And now he wasn't part of the cyber force either, right? So Fort Hood doesn't have any cyber troops. So be very interesting to see kind of what he was doing, and more information becomes available. We obviously, this story's fairly new. We haven't had a chance to do our own research on the suspect, but there's that there. Rhode Island's System for Health and Benefits program that was hacked last month now has the data leaked online. The state has an outreach strategy to encourage potentially impacted Rhode Islanders to protect their personal information, according to a press release from Governor Daniel Mackey's office. The governor said it wasn't yet clear if all files were stolen from the Rhode Island bridges that have been posted on the dark web. Right now, their team is still working diligently. McKee said that they're working with Deloitte, the company that builds and maintains RI bridges, that has been in contact with the cyber criminals. Deloitte's the one that's kind of handling this. They built the product, and so the state is holding their feet to the fire in terms of mitigating the damage there. But one can assume that there's likely going to be further action against Deloitte once the dust settles there in Rhode Island. The governor has encouraged Rhode Islanders to take steps to protect their financial information, including freezing their credit at Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion, contacting one of the reporting agencies to order a free credit report, and requesting a fraud alert to be placed on their credit files. Again, here's the thing about all those things. All those things are there, right? And answering the question, the accounting giant, yes. So Deloitte is no longer an accounting giant. They're a professional services giant. They're one of the largest consulting companies in the world. And they have a huge cybersecurity practice. They have a big technology practice where they go in to governments and build platforms for them and so much more. So yes, to answer your question, the accounting giant Deloitte used to be an accounting giant. They're now a professional services kind of company. They compete with the Accentures and the EYs of sorts there for business. So all those things are true, but here's the one thing to keep in mind. If you're a Rhode Islander or you know someone who's a Rhode Islander, typically you don't see any action on your credit report for years, sometimes never, from a data breach until one day something does click and an attacker decides to do something. And so this isn't something that you do temporarily and then you let it go. It's a new lifestyle that you have to get adjusted to. That's the unknown. That's kind of the unspoken of cost of a cyber attack. New details are now emerging over the CyberHaven Chrome browser extension compromise that has compromised at least 35 different extensions to inject data stealing code, including those from CyberHaven. So CyberHaven is not the source. It's another victim in a larger spree. We talked about this briefly yesterday on the show. But from reports on LinkedIn and Google groups and from targeted developers, the latest campaign started around December 5th, and earlier command and control subdomains were found by Bleeping Computer existed as far as March of 2024, and now they're alerting people as to these. Now, here's the thing about Chrome extensions, and this is significant, folks. A lot of these Chrome extensions, while very kind of effective, if you're not downloading it directly from the website of that company. For example, if you use LastPass or OnePass and you're not downloading their extension directly from their website, you're leaving yourself to be vulnerable, because Google, as a general rule of thumb, never checks this kind of stuff. It just doesn't, because they want to be open source, right? Per se, they want to allow everyone to do something and not just allow several companies to do it. That's the difference between, for example, Google to Apple's ecosystem in those cases. So there's that there. They know that these extensions are misleading. They're poorly formatted. They're not descriptive. They're excessive. But the fact is, most people don't read that. It's kind of like we keep repeating the same thing, the human element, right? Like a broken record in cyber. That's not the case here. The case is, as cybersecurity practitioners, we have to find a way to secure these extensions, or use trusted extensions. And the companies that should be responsible for it are the ones that give the criminals the platform to do it, right? So if you give the criminal the platform to put something out there, then you should be held legally responsible for allowing the criminal to do it. That's my take. Those browser companies should do that. There's that. The Cybercrime Treaty in the UN, a horrible, horrible bill, a absolutely disgusting piece written by a useless organization like the UN that has lost all touch with reality and the world, and has become an echo chamber of just absolutely vile policy. The UN General Assembly adopted the treaty without a vote last week, and they're leaving ratification to individual states, realizing that not all countries will adapt to it. In order for it to enter into force, 40 nations must ratify the treaty. Ratification will not likely happen in the US, as in order for it to be ratified, it needs a 2/3 majority in the Senate. And by all means, if the Senate tries to bring this up to vote, I will camp outside DC. I'll be just outside the Senate. Those senators, as they're coming out of the Rayburn building, walking into the Capitol, we'll be right there reminding them, do not ratify the UN Cybercrime Treaty. It has no business being ratified by the United States or any nation for that matter. It's a void treaty. It has no teeth. It provides authoritarian leadership, and requires governments to cooperate with countries who you may not want to cooperate with, because you know their human rights record, or furthermore, you know their politics and what they're going to use that for. It actually leaves it wide open. So absolutely. And yes, the show is live, 100% live. It's live every day, Monday through Thursday at 9 a.m. Eastern. Answering James's question here, is it true that hackers can actually access your device without user even click a sign link? No, that's not true. Only spyware could do that. Only spyware could do that. Pegasus, stuff like that, could technically get access to your device without a user clicking on it. National Data filed for bankruptcy because they really weren't a financially stable company. They were already in trouble, and the data breach was the straw that broke the camel's back there. So, there's that. Just answering some of those questions there as well. So, Cybercrime Treaty likely going to die, like hopefully the UN will here shortly. GitHub is having a problem with inauthentic stars that are used to artificially inflate the popularity of scam and malware distribution repositories. How's this surprising anyone? Fake Amazon reviews, fake App Store reviews. The fact is that you can go on Fiverr or Upwork or any one of those sites where people will give you fake reviews for a few $100s, right, to boost you up. Did we not think, has anyone been living under, has our head been buried so far in the sand that we just randomly believe those reviews? Anything that we get out of GitHub, anything that we get out of a public repository needs to be checked, not based on how many people give it a review, but rather by its actual code base and actual successful tools. That's not the case here. And what's happening is a lot of developers are using this, and they're using kind of to say, well, it had, 4.5 stars, it had 5 stars, it had all these stars. A lot of people gave it stars, and so it must be good. Not the case. The rule of the many doesn't do it. And obviously, a new study from researchers at Socket and Carnegie Mellon and North Carolina State gave us a better idea, finding 4.5 million stars on GitHub, which are suspected to be fake and paid for, by the way, for pennies per star. Pennies per star. 10 cents a star, 12 cents a star. So if you're a cyber actor, that's just your marketing budget. You go, you buy thousands of stars for pennies to the dollar, and you get them. In delivery time, hours, weeks, instant in some cases. And the fact that GitHub, by the way, the fact that GitHub doesn't recognize this behavior in their platform is disturbing. Again, the fact that GitHub doesn't look for this behavior in their platform is disturbing. 4.5 million stars are suspected to be fake on GitHub. Let that sink in. You got to have a better DevOps plan. Better DevOps plan. Much, much better. The U.S. Treasury Office, OFAC, so the U.S. Treasury Office of Foreign Assets and Control on Tuesday leveled sanctions against 2 entities, one in Iran and one in Russia, for their attempts to interfere in the 2024 presidential elections. The federal agency said entities, a subordinate organization of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard and a Moscow-based affiliate of Russia's main intelligence directorate, the GRU, sought to influence the election. Both of those have been put under an OFAC kind of like sanction list. Doesn't mean anything. They do business in non-US dollars. You can circumvent it. Again, the overuse of sanctions in OFAC and us thinking that it actually does something to these groups is absolutely ridiculous. They don't trade in dollar. They stopped trading in dollar because they know that's the first tool we're going to use. So they're not leaving it out there. You may hurt them by a little bit, but not much, because they're trading in other currencies where OFAC has no influence, and OFAC has no jurisdiction. So a whole bunch of different one of these, like Center for Geopolitical Expertise and a whole bunch, allegedly worked directly with the GRU and is responsible for sabotage and political interference and cyber warfare aimed at the West. I love that. But then again, Putin's been in control for 25 years. He knows which buttons to push. He's not letting sanctions get to his goals. We'll make sure you subscribe at cyberhubpodcast.com. That article will drop on Saturday morning. The introduction of a new cybersecurity disclosure rule by the SEC has led to a significant uptick of reported cybersecurity incidents. However, all of that uptick doesn't mean that security has gotten any better. It's just that companies now have to report more of it, even if it doesn't have material breach, or the lack of having material breach, right? The lack of having material breach in the disclosure just leads to kicking the bucket down. And 6 months later, we obviously know what the material breach was. And it takes time to figure out what the material breach is for a data breach is, because the material impact on a company, just disclosing any sort of material data breaches, takes time to find out. You got to understand so SEC requires to report it within 4 days from the time you discover it. Most report it within 8 days of when they discover it, because initially they'll say, we don't know what this is, we've got to investigate, and then they launch an investigation, then they'll report it. But they don't know the impact of the breach until then. So there's that aspect to it there. We're not making the world any safer. We're not helping make the world any better by reporting these data breaches. The SEC is just simply getting all of these reports in to let investors know. And I say investors know, but all they've done is they've opened the can of worms. Because if I'm a cyber actor and I'm a sophisticated cyber actor, I can short a stock 3 months once I have initial access, once I know I can launch a malware, once I know I can shut them down, I can short the stock of the company, I can launch an attack, I can make more money on that short position than I would trying to negotiate with them. And if I negotiated with them and they paid, great, I've doubled paid. I've made twice the money. But if not, then I'll open just a whole bunch of short positions across a whole bunch of different portfolios, short the stock of the company, make my money, know they're going to report it, and know that that's a cycle. And we've just opened another revenue avenue for cyber criminals. If you want to take away cybercrime, you've got to choke it at the foothold. The foothold is in the aspect of them being able to have any sort of financial gain from it. So when you give them more avenues for financial gain, They do just that. If you don't think that's happening, go talk to anyone. Go talk to anyone who's in threat intelligence and threat hunting, and they'll tell you that's a thing on a lot of those forums. Go talk to anyone. And finally, you know that Russian tanker that snapped the Eagle S Russian tanker that snapped the cables, the EST Link 2 power cable and the 4 telecom cables just outside of Finland. Well, now apparently 7 suspects, among the crew of the alleged Russian spy tanker have been detained in Finland, and a non-travel imposed on them, meaning they cannot leave the country until an investigation is concluded. That travel ban is in place now. The vessel allegedly dropped its anchor in the ocean, dragged it along the seabed, cutting those cables clean, essentially, for Finland. Those cables obviously go from Finland to Canada to different parts of Europe in order to get telecommunication. That's how internet really goes, and that's why Starlink is big, right? That's why the satellite, and what Mike Waltz, the new national security director, national security advisor to President Trump, talked about the fact that now, instead of having just a few big satellites, we have thousands of satellites thanks to Starlink and SpaceX. And we're able to have a lot more resiliency in terms of communication beyond just those cables. So there's that. That's it for our first show. Wow, we've gone way over, but this has been a lot of fun. Thank you for everyone in the YouTube chat there. Safest browser that doesn't sell your information. I use Brave. I know people have different ones. It's how you make it. The interpreter is absolutely right. It's whatever you make the safest, right? I use Brave. Some people use DuckDuckGo. You're absolutely there. Your decision, but there's a lot of different. Maybe we'll do a video on how to secure your browser this year and put that out there. How do you pick a good browser and how do you secure it? Thank you all for tuning in this morning. Have a great rest of your day. Happy New Year. Thank you so much for tuning in. And most importantly, y'all, stay cyber safe.
We love feedback, so make sure to connect with us on social media and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast listening platform.